When it comes to Namor, I'm sorry about pronunciation, I'm not the best at it. A lot of people put him on their tier list at the lower end, and I believe this character is super underrated and undervalued. So I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about him so you don't get flamed in your next ranked match. Now his primary attack is titled Trident of Neptune, all while reducing the aquatic dominion's cooldown upon enemy impact. Now if he lands a critical hit or a headshot, however you want to describe it, it causes Monstro Spawn to enter a berserk state, gaining increased attack speed. Now like I said, the Trident is a projectile type ability, dealing a whopping 70 damage. You have infinite ammo, and the fire rate is about 1.09 rounds per second. Now because he has infinite ammo, you can practically hold down your primary fire button forever, and just as you go, spamming your aquatic dominions whenever. And because of this, paired with his increased attack speed, because of this you can output a lot of damage in a short duration or even long term. Now something to note is that the increased attack speed you get, these are all for your minions. They're not for the hero himself, so don't get these confused. Now his alternative fire or secondary fire, however you want to describe it, is titled Wrath of the Seven Seas. Then direct all Monstro Spawn to perform an enhanced attack on the nearest hit enemy. When the Trident hits an enemy, Monstro Spawn to enter a berserk state, gaining increased attack speed. It's a arced projectile that generates a spell field upon impact, dealing 100 damage, and the cooldown is 6 seconds. But basically, if you land a hit with your secondary fire on an enemy player, so what this is telling you is that if you land your secondary fire on an enemy hero, all your quote-unquote summoned minions or turrets, however you want to describe them, will focus on that one enemy you hit, allowing you to burst enemies down quite quickly. Well, now let's talk about one of his main sources of damage, which is the aquatic dominion. See these squids or octopuses or whatever they are? These are the aquatic dominion. You summon a Monstro Spawn that can autonomously attack enemies. Now the ability type is a arced trajectory where you summon Monstro Spawns. If you direct hit someone, a Monstro will also spawn. Pretty self-explanatory. So the projectile damage is 16.67 per hit, which basically means the actual damage is about 225 to 250. Now for the ammo capacity, it's about 14 to 15, capacity. The fire rate is 1.8 per second, and 3.35 during the berserk state. Again, the berserk state is when you land a critical shot, that being a headshot, or hitting enemies with your alternative fire. And I'll show you some unique tips about his turrets later on in the video. Now another one of his abilities is titled Blessing of the Deep. This is your escape ability or get out of jail free card essentially. You summon a protective barrier while flying upwards. In this state, you're immune to pretty much everything in the entire game. Now you do have to understand where to position when you use this, as yes, you do get a protective barrier that sends you upwards. You can't really move that much from that upwards position. Yes, you can do a little shimmy to the left, to the right, to the front, and the back, but it's not a ton, so you should definitely pay attention to where you're positioning yourself. Now his ultimate is titled Horn of Proteus, or as I like to call it, the Big Fish. You summon a Giganto to leap atop enemies within range, disabling their mobility ability. Now in my eyes, this is a super crucial teamfight ultimate that excels extremely well when all enemies are converged onto a singular point. This can easily turn the tides of any fight. You see what I did there? Tides? Yeah? No? Alright. But let's talk about the cylindrical outline. The inner circle of the ultimate is going to do 500 damage, while the outer circle is going to be doing about 200 damage. Now enemies that are hit by the ultimate also get knocked down within the radius, so even if the ultimate doesn't finish off the kill, hopefully they're stunned for long enough so you can do it yourself. Now his team up ability is actually very good. Your team up ability pairs with Luna Snow and Jeff the Land Shark, but it's titled Frozen Spawn. Now in total it has about 17 shots. The projectile damage is more by being 25 flat, so if all 17 shots are fired, the damage equates to about 425. Now it also has kind of like a slowing freezing effect, so it's very good to pair with your other dominions, and in my eyes just an overall very solid team up ability. So for enemies, instead of having to look out for 2 of your dominions or 2 of your turrets, they now have to account for 3. In my opinion, his playstyle is rather unique. Now he's not necessarily like a Hela or a Hawkeye sitting in the far backline, but he's not like a super bruiser typed character like Wolverine. But he's more like a middle of the pack type of character. Because he's very reliant on placing his dominions around, it's usually in your best interest to place yourself besides some type of wall or object so that you can really get the full effect of your dominions. Now another thing to keep in mind is that you could put yourself into higher up positions because he has the ability to descend. While in the air, by holding your jump button, you can slowly float down, just like a lot of other DPS characters in this game that has, glide or things like that. Namor can also do the same exact thing. Now because of his blessing of the deep protective barrier and his ability to descend, you could also play him a little more aggressive. Because you have decent survivability, this allows you to play a little bit more forward than some other DPS characters. Now one of the biggest questions you're probably going to be asking is, where do I place the aquatic dominions? And a lot of players that are just picking him up for the very first time tend to throw his dominions directly on the ground right next to him. And if you're doing that, I'm going to be blatant and say you're playing him the wrong way. See, his aquatic dominion, like I said earlier, is a arc thrown projectile, and depending on where that projectile lands, it will stick to that surface. So most of the time you want to be throwing his dominions on walls, underneath bridges so they're high up to sea, or any place that's going to be throwing off the enemy's vision to your team. And what I mean by that is that if enemies are having to look up to shoot the minions, that gives yourself and the team to get a very easy pick on a unsuspecting player. But in the case the enemies do notice the turrets, but they still prioritize you and your team, while you're fighting that player, the turret is still going to be shooting them. So even if they don't die to you or your team, they'll end up dying to the turret. So that's why putting the dominions in areas that will pull the enemy's vision is a very good thing to do, and probably the biggest tip I can give to you if you're playing Namor. But what about the combo? How do we get the most damage out of him? First, you start with having both of your aquatic dominions spawned. From there, try to land hits with your primary fire so that you can reduce the cooldown of the aquatic dominion. So if one of the dominions, dies or goes away, you can easily summon another one. While you're doing this, try your best to land critical hits, because like I stated earlier, if you land critical hits, your dominions or monster spawns or turrets, however you want to call them, will have enhanced attacks. That enhancement being attack speed. Now while you're doing this, try to look for, squishy characters, those being healers or squishier DPS. If you notice one of these characters and they're pretty much in the open and free to hit, this is when you want to hit them with the Wrath of the Seven Seas, which again is your alternative fire that will cause all of your monstral spawns to launch an enhanced attack at that singular target. This combo is essentially the bread and butter of Namor. But what about his pros and cons? What does he excel at, and what does this character find challenging? Now with the many hours that I have played with him, I can tell you that he excels at getting rid of any dive DPS. Now what do I mean by dive DPS? I'm mainly talking about characters like Spider-Man, Black Panther, Psylocke, any character that's going to be harassing your backline. Because if you have your aquatic dominions spawn, because these turrets will automatically focus down these diving targets and allow you to get some pretty easy kills. Now another pro that I see with Namor is that he might seem a little bit lackluster with damage, but you might be easily deceived by this character, because this character, if played properly and you position your aquatic dominions in very good spots, you can easily be the top of your leaderboard with damage. Now like I stated earlier in the video, another pro that he has is his survivability. His main survivability mode is the protective barrier that he can cast. This allows him to escape from any type of ultimate that's coming at him, and it also allows him to position himself in higher up places that players might not expect a character like Namor to be in. And because the ability to reposition like this opens up the gates of the capabilities that this character has. Now what about the cons? What does he lack in? Now, one of the first ones, even though I did mention that his protective barrier is a pro and is very good escape, that's also one of his biggest cons. He only has really one form of escape. If you use this ability too early, it does have a 15-second cooldown, so you can be in a lot of trouble if not timed correctly. Now, another one of his cons is I did say that he's fairly good against pretty much every single dive character. The character that I find myself having the most trouble with when I'm on Namor is Magic. Magic gains a ton of shield, from using her abilities. She has a teleport ability that allows her to phase in and out of reality, so she can dodge, his attacks. So it can be rather frustrating to play Namor into a character like Magic. So to try to get around this, try to play close to your tanks or your supports, as playing with your team is like the biggest op to any player in this game. No one really plays with their team from what I've noticed. No one ever really groups up or communicates, so try to play with your team. And I guess you could say another con to this character is repetition. And what I mean by that is placing your aquatic dominions in the same spot. If you keep playing them in the same spot, enemy players can anticipate where they're going to be and pretty much pre-fire them or just instantly get rid of them. So you should always be aware of where they are and try to macro them as best as possible. Moving them around to different positions can really confuse the enemy and making them look all over the place with no success. But because I don't want to take too much of your time out of this day, that basically wraps up the entire guide to Namor and pretty much everything you need to know about this character. As long as you know the bread and butter combo, you can essentially use that to forge it into your own playstyle. Because there's always some games that you want to play a little more aggressive and sometimes you want to play a little bit more passive. I think this character is a really great example of both a aggressive and a passive style DPS or damage character. And lastly, I do want to say if you found this guide useful in any shape, way, or form, or you just like the content in general, do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button, as it would mean the world to me. And let me know what other guides you would like to see down below in the comments. This has been Duck Films, and I hope you have a great day.